If you're having paranormal issues, contact us at mwghosthunters.com. From the files of the Midwest Ghost Hunters.
All right, Midwest Ghost Hunters site investigation, recorder 1.
Oh, Justin, right there. Something just moved behind you.
Yes, it did.
What the was that?
What happened?
Something touched my ear, man.
What's that?
This is Dark Matter with Midwest Ghost Hunters.
It's Midwest Ghost Hunters Dark Matter podcast at Pythian Castle in Springfield, Missouri. This is my first time back with you guys in like a month.
Yeah, you've been off doing the television show.
Did the television show the past couple weeks, which was an interesting experience, and we can get into it another time. It was surreal and bizarre and grueling and long, but it was pretty cool. Here in a couple weeks, we do have a home investigation that we're going to do. It's a home in Battlefield, Missouri. That we've been talking to her now for, her name's Holly, and we've been talking to her now since July or August. It's been a while. She's been sending some videos and different things that are happening inside her house. There is a lot there, a lot going on there. But the cool thing about this one is, for the first time ever, we're going to do a home investigation, and 417 Magazine is going to come with us. We're going to have a reporter from 417 Magazine come with us from beginning to end and write an article about it.
That's going to be interesting.
So we'll see how that goes. We'll try to present ourselves well. We'll have to write a new handbook about appropriate behavior with a guest. Speaking of guests, we do have a couple of guests here with us today. John, would you like to? Yeah. Since you kind of set this one up, you can kind of do the introductions here.
I have known this family my entire life, and Chris has known them a long time too. You want to talk about a rock solid family who is not into the ghost, into the paranormal. They didn't, or at least when I knew them growing up, they were certainly not people that would go around and pin things on ghosts. They didn't do that stuff. We're talking as rock solid as it can be. We've got Chanda and we've got Carrie here today. This all came about because I ran into your dad one time and got into a conversation with him about paranormal activity. I believe it was at Carrie's house in Battlefield.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's just the limited thing. I'm like, okay, if he sees that, if he has experienced that, because this is a guy, I just cannot drive home the dead seriousness, the as grounded as a person can be. Is their dad Ron is just he's a great human being, a fantastic guy. But Ron is a guy that is never going to come running out here and say, "Oh, I saw this thing."
It's so weird because I completely forgot Ron was your dad.
Yeah,
I've known him forever too.
This is the Ron I've been talking about.
Yeah. I didn't put it together in my head, but I've known him since I was like, I don't know, 6.
Right, and see, you know the guy, you know the integrity of it.
I'm just now finishing the.
Now you're seeing
puzzle.
why.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing why I'm like, okay, if he saw activity, if they have seen activity, you know it's real. I believe that 1,000%. If you guys could, I don't know who wants to talk or who wants to do what to lead off, Carrie or Chanda or whoever. If just tell us the stories, tell us about some of the things, because my eyes got as big as saucers from the stories that Ron was telling me.
Well, I will say that I didn't believe it, but when she bought this house, the first time that I went into it just to see it before they even moved in, they got under contract, I had a very kind of weird feeling about it, just walking through it. The carpet had been torn up, the doors had been torn up, there was a window broken downstairs. Yes, I mean, there was a lot going on with this house before they even moved in. And I asked Carrie, I said, what's up with this stuff? And she said, well, it's all going to be fixed. It was a repoed house, and she's like, I'm getting a great deal on it.
Just to get a little idea of the time frame here, when was that? When was this?
Well, so that tornado went through Battlefield when our house was under contract, whenever we were purchasing it. The only damage that we sustained was a car seat actually hit the window at the bottom of the stairs and broke it. But that's how I remember when we moved in 2003. So.
Okay, and how old a house was this that you bought?
Not very old. Don't quote me exactly, but I think it was only 5-6 years old.
Okay, so this isn't like a 200-year-old home in the Battlefield area.
No.
And this was a house that you bought. You bought for your. Who was living? Who was going to live there?
Me.
Just you. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And this have we mentioned, by the way, kind of tying it back to the beginning, your house is also in, are we allowed to say? It's in Battlefield as well.
The house that she's talking about was in Battlefield.
Correct.
Yes, the house you're talking about is in Battlefield, which I've been looking up here and learning a lot about the town itself. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about what happened inside the house that kind of raised your eyebrows a little bit.
Well, we moved down in 2003. It was me, my husband, ex-husband, and 2 little kids, 2 girls. And we just started experiencing, we felt funny all the time, like someone was watching us, but things would happen all the time, like the water would turn on, toilets would flush, doors would open on their own, after we checked them to make sure they were locked. I mean, we're talking doors to the outside of the home. I tried to be brave, and I was hoping I wasn't losing my mind, so we slept with fans on, and the first few months, actually, all 4 of us slept in the same bed because we were terrified.
Oh, wow.
So I can remember, after she lived there for like 3 months, she didn't say anything to us. Like, she was just being very quiet. I remember I went over to the house one day, and we're just sitting there just chit-chatting, and the kids are playing outside, I think, and she just looks at me and says, "Chanda?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Our house is haunted." And I went, "What?" And she's like, "I'm serious. It's haunted." And I looked over at Tim, and Tim's just sitting there just with his head nodding like, yes. And I'm like, "What's been happening?" And I think the weird thing was, at first she told me that, things was happening to Tim, and Tim wouldn't say anything to Carrie. And then Carrie was having weird things happen to her, but she wouldn't say anything to Tim, because I think they just kind of both thought that they were...
That is 100% normal in the paranormal
That happens
thing.
a lot. And typically what also happens a lot, the husband doesn't believe the wife. Many times. Not necessarily in this case, but that's another, typical thing that happens, aside from, keeping your personal experiences to yourself. Did you ever have any, visual, did you ever see anything?
Yes. Mainly, again, my ex-husband was the main one, and Kayla, my oldest daughter, would see things. One day I think it was in the evening, and we were upstairs. Our basement actually walked out to the backyard. We were just sitting up there watching TV, and it got really cold inside, and it was cold outside. And we're like, "Oh, that's strange." And so we walked down our stairs and turned the corner, and the door was wide open. And so that kept happening over and over and over, until one day my ex-husband, Tim, he went down there to check out the cold draft again. And when he rounded the corner, he saw a very tall man in a tall hat, a round hat, standing at the bottom of the stairs. And he said it was so lifelike that he asked, "What are you doing here?" And he went to charge him and tackle him, and went right through him.
That's a move I wouldn't have made.
Well, they didn't have, when they first bought the house, they didn't have a privacy fence. And so, they would put the kids to bed, go downstairs, check the windows, deadbolt the door, lock the door,
Right.
and then go upstairs and start watching the news. And then all of a sudden they would feel this cold draft coming up the stairwell. So they'd go downstairs and the door would be wide open.
And it's been deadbolted.
Well, that was
Deadbolted,
yes.
that was going to be my question.
It had 2 locks
Yes.
on it.
If
It
the
had 2
door
locks.
was actually being unlocked, and it had to be unlocked from the inside, obviously.
So, but we, at that point, they kind of wondered, they don't have a privacy fence around the backyard. So it made you wonder, did someone have a key to the house? Were they literally going to the back door and unlocking it? you know?
Right.
I thought that my ex-husband was playing tricks on me.
Yeah.
I really did.
Well, I mean, your first logical thought is going to be a human is in my house. It's not
Yes.
going to. It's not going to be that. You think maybe your house is haunted.
And anyone that's listening right now is saying, how can they possibly not automatically think it's a ghost? This goes into the thing I was talking about this family is absolutely grounded as grounded can be. They're going to find what's the real reason that could be.
Well, I think most I hate to say normal. Most
We're not normal.
average people hopefully, except for the ones who want a ghost in there or think they want a ghost in their house, are going to try to reason through, possible intruder or, those type of things before you jump into, something paranormal for sure.
So when he goes through this guy that he tries to tackle, this man, this tall man wearing a hat, and he tries to tackle him, and so then what happens at that point in time? Does he come running back up the stairs and say, "Carrie, I saw a ghost"? I mean, what does he do?
I don't know. Weird things happen so many times. I kind of put it in the back of my mind.
I do remember
and tried to block it out. I remember him coming upstairs terrified, and for days after that, he would be like, "I'm having anxiety. I'm having stress. I don't feel good. I feel like my heart is racing." And so that was his complaint pretty much there forward after he had that particular experience.
I do remember him saying that, when he saw him, he thought, "Oh my gosh, I've got to tackle this guy." And when he went to go tackle him, he went through him and landed on the floor. So, he thought that it was a physical guy standing there. He thought he needs to protect his family and, I'm going to attack this guy. And he went right through him. With what I understand and remember him telling me, it was close to the door that was open downstairs. So at that point was when they had scheduled to put a privacy fence around the back of the house. And then they actually put locks on both gates on both sides.
Did the locks inside get changed?
We had everything rekeyed.
Because I know they were talking to Dad at that time, trying to figure out, ask him questions and say, "Hey, this is happening. What should we do?" And Dad even suggested, "Hey, put a light on that balcony out there that faces down towards that door."
Right.
Because if it senses the motion, it will set off and you'll see that light, so you'll know if someone's coming up to the back door.
Okay, that's a good idea.
So that was something that they did.
We, of course, didn't have a lot of money. We were raising two little kids at the time. I'm just a nurse. So we bought those sensors that goes on your door and your frame. And when they separate, they go off. You know what I'm talking about? We put those on the windows and we put that on the door so we could hear that squealing a lot, of course.
That's amazing. Now, going back to the guy that he saw, did he give a description of a period piece, an idea of he looked like a Civil War guy? He just looked like
It was a guy in a black suit. He had a very tall hat on, a round hat. I picture like the 1800s. I don't know if that's correct or not. That's what I picture.
And not a form, but actually it looks like a guy.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he could see his face and everything and thought it was a real person. That's why he tried to tackle him.
So to give everybody a little bit of background and why it may have such a high amount of paranormal activity, there is a Civil War connection there.
Yeah, we talked about that on a previous podcast, that there's one of the big famous battles of the Civil War was fought in Battlefield, and that the town gets its name from the Wilson's Creek Battlefield Civil War area. So there's a tremendous amount of trauma from that period in that area.
And there's a lot of people who have visual sightings. They tend to see people wearing Civil War uniforms.
Right.
Not all of them, but many of them do. This sounds like this was a
man,
a dude. Yeah, just a guy.
Yeah. We named him Bob. We talked to him.
Now, after your ex-husband attempted to tackle him, did you see him anymore?
He did not see him after that. But my oldest daughter, who was, how old would Kayla have been?
She wasn't very old at all.
10, 11, about that
Usually
age.
kids have an ability to see things that adults don't. So continue on.
Yeah. She would always hear her name called and no one was in the house when she walked in before us, that kind of thing. She actually walked into somebody and saw a plaid shirt in front of her face one day, and that terrified her, of course. We also had a dog that we had to put down right after we moved to the home.
And Bear was they lived in Springfield before, and there was no issue with this dog. And he was not that old. right?
He was about 5-6 years
Yeah.
old.
So, I mean,
German Shepherd.
perfectly healthy, never had an issue with him. The only issue that they ever would have, they had to put him on a long chain in the back because the chain link fence wasn't really tall. He'd scale it and
Okay.
he'd go over to the neighbors and say, hey, hi to the neighbors.
Right.
But that was the only issue they ever had with him. They move into this house, and you remember I told you that all of the door jambs were torn up, scratched beyond belief. Carpet was ripped up at the doorways. And I remember asking Carrie, like, what? She goes, well, they must have had some sort of animal in here. But the builder, so the house was not that old, because didn't you say the builder was going to fix all the trim work and everything? They had everything fixed before they moved in. So everything was back to normal when they moved into the house. And immediately Bear got into the house and started whining. He would whine and whine and whine. He would whine to get in. He would whine to get out. He was scratching the doors, scratching
Even when he
the
was
carpet.
with us, he was acting strange.
They had to
all the
put
time.
him in a pen because they couldn't hardly control him. And they had a cat that she would go in and out at the house in Springfield, but then when they got there, she would go out for longer days and then come back and then be out, and then finally she disappeared.
Did the dog get sick?
Yes. It actually bit my husband. It started growling at the kids, and so we had to put it down.
They said that he was stressed and had congestive heart failure, and that's too early for him, and especially the fact that he was completely fine, and then the minute that they moved in, he started having issues.
I get stuck on your ex-husband trying to tackle, and then right after that, he started having a lot of anxiety. I've heard of stories of this before, where people try to confront something like that aggressively like that, and then they end up having anxiety and depression and stuff like that immediately after.
You walk downstairs, you see a door open that you locked. A man is standing there, and you go to tackle him, and you go right through him. That's going to cause you some.
I can see that happening.
Yeah.
Well, he would tell me that he would be at home because Carrie would go to work, and he would be home because maybe he was in construction, so sometimes they didn't always get to work because of the weather. And so sometimes he would be at home, he'd take the kids to school, and he'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden the toilet would flush upstairs. And they had 3 bathrooms. So he'd walk in there, and he was like, okay, why did that flush? And so he'd go back and start watching TV again, and then all of a sudden the toilet downstairs would flush. So he would go down there, confirm that it had flushed. So he'd go back upstairs, and then their master bathroom would flush. And faucets would turn on, and he would literally have to turn the water off. The girls had told me at one point that they would try to take a shower, and they would see like someone had tried to write something in the mist on the mirror. They could never make it out, but it looked like somebody had tried to write something on the mirror.
Well, that's
not good.
That's freaky. Getting out and seeing, someone try to write something in the mirror, that's a whole different level of freaky. So did you ever look into what might be the cause or who it might be, or did anybody pass away?
Did you ever do any history on the home itself?
So Dad told us that years ago, where that particular street is, there was a railroad bed, an old railroad bed that ran through there. And sometimes they would explain to me that they would hear like what sounded like a train coming through there. And they could also hear drums.
Yes, we heard drums a lot.
Yes.
What would that mean? Is that like a military thing?
It'd be a residual. Well, if it's the battlefield, it could be the marching of the troops.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
I mean, that could be that.
The biggest thing that the first night she said that they moved in, they put the kids to bed, and their bedrooms were both right across the hallway from Carrie and Tim. They had a big boom. Do you remember the big sonic? It was like she explained it as if there was a huge something fell off the shelf. It just this big loud
vibrated the house.
Just boom, and it scared the kids. And the kids come running in, and they all didn't know what had happened. And, I remember them saying they went through the house to see, did something fall off the shelf down in the basement? Did something, what happened? Why was there this big boom? And after that, that's why the kids slept in their room, was because they were terrified.
Did the neighbors hear this?
So
We didn't have neighbors for long.
Okay.
you could drive down that particular street and there was constantly for sale signs up.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
And right beside us, especially on one side, we didn't ever get to know the neighbors because they moved so often. At least every year the home was for sale. And they never talked to us about anything, but we knew why.
And
we knew
they
why.
had one couple that moved in and they had 2 or 3 kids or something. But
They sit
anyway,
there.
like they moved in and they came from out of the area and they move in and like not even 2 weeks later, that guy was out looking for another job and they left within a month and they bought that house.
Wow.
So they were gone. They weren't even there a month.
So they weren't like renting it. They
No,
actually
they bought it.
the house.
They bought
and then
it.
moved
Those
out.
houses were for sale. It wasn't a house or a street that.
I don't know
there was
how many owners that my house had before I bought it, but the house was not even 10 years old.
No, it wasn't very old at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But it already had
yeah.
multiple owners and was under foreclosure.
So the boom sound, am I just the only one that's stuck? I'm probably too stuck on the military. Was it like loud, like cannon loud?
I just
something fell?
remember it. She said, and Tim even said, it was like an explosive boom sound. That was their
you
very
could
first.
feel
note.
it in your body.
See, that could be if you're what you're going for, and it could be is the sound of the Civil War cannon going off. Yeah, that would do it.
After the fact, I've had kind of done some a little bit of research on some things, and someone had said that there can be a sonic boom, that there's and that is, I don't know, the gateway for those spirits to come in or something. I don't know, because I've watched some paranormal stuff, in the recent years, and I had heard something about a sonic boom, that's like the gateway for spirits to come through or whatever. So I don't know if that was, because they didn't notice anything until then.
So that was the opening of everything.
Yeah, it just seemed like that was their first.
At least what opened it
It's
for
what
you guys.
caught our attention.
Yeah,
So that was before the man appeared.
Oh,
yes,
yes.
that was like the first night, the very first night, and it was like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were all just dead asleep, and just the sonic boom, and then after that, everything just started happening.
And it wasn't like a lightning strike. Lightning would strike by our house a lot. It actually struck our house a couple of times. It wasn't like that. It was different.
It was a different, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I remember her telling me too that she tried to make dinner and it took her an hour and a half to make dinner because she had an electric skillet and she put the meat in there and was trying to get it cooking. She'd get it up to temp and then she would go over and cut her onions. She'd come back and it was on simmer. So she thought that was really weird. Turn it back up and then get it sauteing again. Turn around
like 3 times.
And
thought,
every time
what
she
in the
went
world?
back, it kept going back to simmer. But every time she had turned around to do something else, so she wasn't watching it. And she said, it took me forever to cook dinner the other night because I couldn't keep the electric skillet up. It just kept going back to simmer. And it was a turn dial. So in the first instance that she told Dad, because she was talking about the door downstairs, because that was their first concern.
Right.
I mean, it's in the dead of winter. So you have a lot of cold air coming up that stairwell to your house. And, they don't know it's open because it's in the walkout basement. Well, they'd feel that cold. And, obviously, when he goes down and sees a man there, he's scared that somebody's got, a key to their house and they're getting in. Also, their utility bills were not the cheapest because they had all this air coming up their stairwell. And so, they were talking to Dad. The day that they were talking, they had a picture of Dad on the baker's rack.
Mom and Dad, yeah.
Yeah, Mom and Dad that was on the baker's rack.
Okay.
And they had little small items sitting right in front of it. And she's talking to him about saying, what can we do about the store? I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, that picture of Dad and Mom went flying off the baker's rack, but did not disturb anything in front of it.
Yeah.
And it shattered on the floor.
Yes, that was very scary.
I mean, the kind of activity, like that, physical movement of a physical item, even the toilet flushing is a bigger deal than I think, because if you ever looked inside the tank, I mean, requires a physical force, a mechanism. You actually have to lift the plug in order to get the toilet to flush. That kind of stuff is pretty not common as far as, paranormal activity goes, where physical items are being manipulated like that. And I can also say, as a person who has a house with a walkout basement, my biggest fear, even after living there for 10 years, is someday, to go downstairs and see that door open.
Yes.
Because once that door's open, someone's in there and they could be anywhere. So yeah, I can imagine walking downstairs and seeing a door open like that freaking you out. It would certainly freak me out. I've had that before where the door wasn't open, it was just jammed. It was probably just me going out and, watering the plants or something. But I check every corner, under every bed. So yeah, that would definitely be a little jarring to see even just something little like that, let alone, manipulation of physical, objects like pictures or, toilet flushing or even your skillet,
And when you see those pictures go flying and no one's there to move that picture and it shatters, even if the picture doesn't shatter, it's still incredibly terrifying that something moved a picture when no one's there.
Did I bump it? Did I hit it? And then how come the things in front of it
didn't come
move?
off?
So when did your dad come to the realization, okay, this is the real deal. We've got paranormal activity going on in this house, because he is as rock solid a guy as ever. Was there a particular incident?
We didn't talk about it to many people. We didn't really talk about it and share it. So I think it was a few months.
Well, it took you 3 months to tell me even. Yeah. I mean, I
thought I was just losing my mind.
Right. And that's very common. Most people that do have paranormal activity, you've got two different groups. You've got the people over here that just love it and think that, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever. I've got ghosts in my house, which is a very small group.
They usually don't think that for long.
And most people think, okay, something's wrong. There's something wrong with me. And that's the most common.
They had a little chihuahua too, and the little chihuahua had gone downstairs and there was no one down there. And she was walking, because the way you walk down their stairs, you had to walk all the way down the stairs and then you had to do a U-turn to get into the basement. And so she was downstairs in the basement by herself. Well, she had come back to the wall and was coming around the U to walk up the stairs. And all of a sudden they heard her go, yipe! And it sounded like she hit the wall.
Yeah.
And then she ran up the stairs. So the kids were like, what just happened to her? And they also they had a L-shaped couch with the recliner at the end. And
yeah, we had a separate recliner that rocked.
Mm-hmm.
And we would go downstairs all the time. It was rocking on its own. So we got rid of that.
I don't really know how they stayed there as long as they did, because you were there for what, 8 years, 7, 8 years?
It was 9 years. Yeah.
And I after a while you wouldn't even hear any stories, and finally we would go over there and say, Kayla, so what's been going on? And she's like, I don't know, somebody took a shower like 3 times last night.
Wow.
So you don't get used to it, but it kind of became part of the normal day-to-day.
I don't know that they ever felt like whatever was there was demonic.
Yeah, it didn't feel malicious at all. It just felt
annoying.
Like it was
a presence.
It was trying to trick us or something all the time.
So during those 9 years, was it pretty consistent? Or did you get like off months where it's like, hey, nothing's happened for a while? Or...
Correct. Yes.
And then it would just come back?
Yep. You never knew. It seemed to be associated with cold weather, and then when storms came
when
through.
It was stormy and it was,
It seems like something would happen like every 3 weeks or something like that, and a lot of things would happen, and then we'd have a month or two where it would shut down.
Speaking of storms, is it normal for your house to be hit a couple of times by lightning?
I've never heard of a house being hit by lightning at all.
Just to go back a little bit,
I don't know.
That doesn't feel normal to me.
It happens all the time. So my dad put one of those grounding rods in the house, so it wouldn't hurt anything inside the house.
Did you have a?
But it happened over and over and over.
Did you have like some? You had some electronics, like a TV blown out or something too, and they did have a paranormal group come in.
Okay.
I can't remember where he was from, Illinois or Ohio, but he was going to the Crescent Motel, gonna research that place as well, and he asked to come to my house on his way and doing some investigation. He did feel like something was there. He actually left me one of those electronic meters. I'm sorry, I don't know what
EMF detector?
EMF detectors. And it would go up and down all the time for just no reason. He thought that was really odd. Someone actually took a picture of that device while I was holding it, and there was a strange red light in the photo that went up above it.
The kids had actually... We had Christmas over there, and we went down into the basement, and all the kids got these digital cameras that year. So they pop the batteries in and they start taking pictures. Well, they didn't have the chips to put in them. And ironically, our mom, of course, she had breast cancer at that point. Right? I'm pretty sure she was going through her breast cancer. A lot of the pictures that the kids took of her had a lot of orbs, and then Mom was sitting next to a dark blue wall, and there was a neon squiggly next to her head. And then Mom was carrying around that device, and they said when it spikes to take a picture just to see if you can capture something or whatever. She goes, "Now!" And Carrie took that picture, and there is a squiggly right above her head, some sort of neon. But Kimmy, my daughter, my youngest, she took some pictures inside that house, and there was these big orbs in the pictures that we noticed. Not little, some of them were very big.
Did the paranormal guy that came in, did he do any audio recordings, video recordings, anything like that?
No. He didn't physically see anything happen or hear the toilets flushing, anything like that.
Right.
I think it was just the EMF reader.
That's still unusual, though. If there's no electronics or anything near it, it really shouldn't be doing that.
Well, a relatively new house is pretty well insulated. A 10-year-old house is new, really.
Yeah.
So, most of the time when we see high EMF leaks, it's in a house that's 100 years old. They're not as well insulated electrically. But yeah, in a house that new, I mean, there really shouldn't be, unless, like John said, you're walking past a microwave. It may peak a little bit. But yeah, that would be...
This was mainly in our master bedroom.
Yes, I remember.
And it was also in Kirsten's room right across the hallway.
My advice would have probably been have Christmas somewhere else. Pick someone else's house.
We loved our house, and we just accepted Bob. It was okay.
So one thing that I can say too is that, so we had one of the girls' birthday parties or something. We had a big get together. So we're over at their house, and they found an old video of the day they moved in. And so they had an old shed that was at their previous property. And so Dad did a whole video. You remember how he was with the camera?
Yeah, that's where I was going to...
Yeah. He had the camera, so he recorded, who was there to help move. And so, you can remember all that stuff. And so they had moved the shed, and they took it and put it in the backyard, and how they unloaded it and everything. So we're like sitting there going, oh my gosh, well, I can't remember that John was there. And, this person was there. So we're sitting there watching it, and Kayla was sitting on the right of the couch. Dad was sitting on the left of the couch, and everyone else is just like standing, and then they had another couch across the way. So we're all sitting there talking about this video. All of a sudden, it starts to go fast forward. And we were all like, hey, like, who has the remote, like, what? And Kayla looks at my dad, And Dad looks at Kayla. Well, that remote was sitting on the couch in between them both. And neither one of them had touched it. And Kayla got up and says, Daddy! And she went running. And after that, we tried to get that VCR to stop. We could not get it to stop. It was fast forwarding through them moving in. And so then we kind of all started joking around. Well, I guess the ghost doesn't want to watch this. And so we were pushing play, we were pushing stop, we were pushing like rewind. We tried everything. We tried the eject button. We could not get it to eject.
They just had to unplug
We
it.
had to unplug it from the wall. It would not do anything. And no one had touched the remote.
Did it ever get fixed? Did it ever stop doing that? Like, did it work later?
It worked.
It worked later. Another instance that we had was Carrie had already told me about, what was happening. And I had set my daughter up with, Kayla had the iTunes, and my daughter had I got her an MP3 player. And so I was having trouble with getting songs set up on her MP3 player, and then she had that little iPod. So I was asking Kayla, I was like, hey, do you know anything about these MP3 players? And she's like, well, you can go in there. And they had a computer set up in Kayla's room. And Kayla's like, well, you can listen to the music, but she's like, sometimes it messes up. And I'm like, huh? I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, sometimes it plays, but sometimes it really messes up. And so I don't, she was just and I was like, Kayla, are you okay? She's like, well, you can play with it, but I'm going to go into the living room. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting there and I start to play the songs and they start playing normally. Everything's going good. And then I was like fidgeting with something. And then I went to go play another song. And you know how a record sounds really weird when it's like done in reverse? Well, this didn't even sound in reverse. It sounded almost demonic. It was, just completely distorted.
Totally garbled. I've never heard anything like that before.
This is on a computer?
Yes, it was on their computer. It was on their iTunes.
It was an MP3 that did that?
No, it was on her iTunes.
But that would be an MP3, right?
Well, technically, it'd be like an MP4.
MP4, okay.
Yeah, this was way back in the day, when they first started coming out with those. And I was trying to figure out, because the MP3 players you did, on the media, and I just knew she had the iPod. So I was trying to figure out how do you work the iPod. And I had her iPod there, but it was her music that was on her iTunes. Like I said, the first couple of songs I played, it was doing fine. And I was fidgeting with this MP3 player and trying to read about the instructions. And then I went to play another song, and it came through, and Kayla heard it, so she ran back in and then was like, oh my God. And she's like, Mom! And she went running back out of the room, and I just couldn't stop listening to it. But I was like, what is this? Did
it sound like some warped version of the song you were trying to play?
Yes, but it was, it almost reminded you of like a song trying to be played backwards, but it was completely different from that. I don't know how to explain it.
Is that even possible?
Completely distorted.
Well, I know what you're asking, but the fact that you're asking that question on a podcast that we're talking about. A record can skip. I know what you mean, because it's a file on a computer.
But it's a file on a computer.
So it's not like something. That's very strange.
But
did it play normally ever? With sometimes it played normally and other times it didn't.
Yes, but
that's the strange thing.
That's the weird part. Yeah,
that's the way that Kayla.
If it's a corrupt file, it's a corrupt file.
Right.
But it'll play that way every time. Like it's a computer.
It shouldn't do that. There are programs that you can use to do that, but once you've done that, the file will always be like that.
Well, a lot of times too with iTunes, if a file's corrupted, it just won't.
It won't play at all.
Yeah.
That was my experience with iTunes. There were songs that it would just skip entirely.
And that's why
Did you hear that?
I did.
That's why I was saying that Kayla told me that she warned me before I went to go use it.
So she had experienced this before.
She had experienced this before.
And never told me about it.
And didn't like it sounds like.
Yeah.
No. And she would just stop. If she heard that, she just would get off of it. And so she wanted to warn me before I even started to use it. And I'm like, okay. I thought, this is really weird. Like, why would she say that? Of course, the first couple songs I play, completely fine. And then I started fidgeting with something, and then I picked another one and went to play it, and I was like, what am I listening to? And I do remember that it was like fall time, so it was like very cold. I think it was like raining outside. And I had an experience too. And so my kids and my husband were going back east to go see their family. It was over the holidays. We were getting ready to lose one of our grandpa on my mom's side. And so I just felt uncomfortable staying at my house by myself, because if it happened, I just wanted to be with family. But I admittedly was very nervous about going over to her house.
I can understand why. I think I would have stayed at my own house, but continue on.
I honestly think I probably should have. The first night I went over there, and they told me when I went over there, they said, well, some strange things might happen because...
They got to give you the disclaimers.
They did, and they said,
we're like, talk to it, it'll be okay.
And I'm like, okay, guys. So I'm like, okay. And they said, well, just know that if you hear something, whatever. Okay, so I'm sitting on the couch.
You'd brought your dog.
I had brought my dog. I had a little schnauzer, and she was completely fine the whole night, but I noticed that she did stay pretty close to me, and that was fine. We're sitting there on the couch, and all of a sudden, the sound of like beads hitting the floor, or a necklace hitting the floor,
right,
of some sort of beads, and then like somebody drags it off the tile.
Yes.
I was sitting there, and ironically, because their doorway, it was one of those doorways where, it's kind of set back in the house, if that makes sense. So you kind of have a little hallway you walk into to get to the front door. So that makes the front door pretty close to the couch on the right. And then their back door was really close to the couch on the left. And so they had a tile front entry, and I thought that I heard beads hit the floor and like just, across the floor. And I was like, what was that? And it sounded right next to me. And they were all like, I don't know.
Was there any evidence of anything spilled on the floor?
No.
Because I only bring that up because we've heard that. Remember?
Really?
Yeah.
Willard. Bunch of beads being spilled on the floor.
Just beads, like a necklace of some sort.
And what was the thing that you associated it with?
There was a rainmaker sound.
Potpourri.
There was some sort of
the instrument?
Yeah.
A rainmaker.
A rainmaker, okay.
So anyway, but that's what it sounded like to me. So so that freaked me out. And then I said, okay, so where can I sleep tonight? Where's the safe room? And they said, well, Kayla's room is pretty safe. I'd sleep in there. So the first night I slept in there with her. I remember it was raining outside. I remember waking up several times, just feeling uneasy, but nothing really happened. And then the next night, Kayla was going to go spend the night with one of her friends. And so I said, Kayla, do you mind if I sleep in your room? She's like, well, I really don't want anybody in there while I'm gone. So I'm like, okay. Carrie's like, yeah, you can sleep in the living room. Like, crap.
I think in my mind, I think in my mind, the safe room would have been the back seat of my car.
I almost begged Carrie, can I just sleep on the floor beside you in your room? So I had to sleep in the living room, and they had the sleeper sofa. So they got that all opened up, and I piled pillows all down me, put blankets on top of me, because it's right also by the stairwell that leads to the downstairs. And I remember I turned a light on in Kayla's room, and then shut the door, almost cracked it just so I could have a little bit of light in there, because it was pretty dark.
Right.
And so I went to sleep, and I woke up and the light was off. And I thought, okay, well, maybe somebody woke up and turned that off, no biggie. And my dog was sleeping next to me, and all of a sudden she starts to growl, and I'm like, okay. And she's just and then it gets a little worse, and it starts to get a little worse. Next thing you know, their little dog Angel comes out of their bedroom, and they're both barking at the entry for the stairwell leaving downstairs.
Oh, that's great.
I put the blanket over my head, and Carrie said, if anything happens, just talk to it. That was one thing that person had told them was, talk to it. So I put the blanket over my head and I said, I'm not going to look at you. You can go away. Just go away. Just go away. I'm not going to look at you. I'm not looking at you. You might as well just give it up. I'm not looking at you. So I kept the blanket over my head. And then all of a sudden, the dogs both started to calm down. Angel turned around and left and went back to their bedroom, and Chloe came back and laid down. It took me a little bit, and I finally pulled the blanket back down. I didn't see anything. It was dark, and I'm like, okay. So I fall back to sleep. And then all of a sudden, Chloe starts to growl again. And I'm like, okay, it's very calm at first. Then it gets a little more, and then she starts on full barking. And then Angel ran back out. They're both barking at the same place. I put the blankets back over my head. I say the same thing. I'm not going to look at you. You might as well go away. I'm not looking. I'm not going to have it. Nope. Then finally they calmed down. This happened 3 or 4 times that night, through the night.
If I had the fan on, I heard nothing. So.
They would just put the fans on high. I'm like...
So you did the very thing they do in horror movies that I never understand. Pulling the blankets over your head. Because you never know what's going to be standing there when you yank them back down.
No, I'm not.
Well, you
no.
don't yank them back down. You slowly pull them back down.
Yeah, no, I put them directly over my head.
I thought you were going to say something started pulling on your blanket.
No, that never happened, but I could it definitely, because it was at my head, because the way the couch set, it was
behind her.
It was behind me. The stairwell was behind me. And so the dogs were always directing their barks towards that. And I mean, Chloe got pretty aggressive. Like, she was barking pretty aggressively each time. So I knew something was there. Also, too...
Our dogs would bark randomly at the stairwell. We never thought anything of it.
Yes, and also, too, she would tell me that they would get very, very cold sensations. Like a very cold, and I remember feeling a cold sensation.
Just to put it in perspective, like as cold as we are right now?
Yes.
Or
yes, it's,
my hands are numb.
Yes, it's pretty cold in here. Yeah, it is.
So at this point, were you proud of your decision to spend a relaxing night at her house?
No, and I told her I probably will never do that again. And then my brother and sister-in-law had stayed there as well. And was it Tina that felt like she had somebody patting her face?
Yes, and she woke up the next morning and said, I'm staying somewhere else.
I guess.
There you go. That's the decision.
I guess. So Lance was asleep. They were both sleeping. Actually, they slept in Kirsten's room, which was the worst room to be in. So they slept there. And I actually, when they told me that, I said, you slept in there? Like, we were always told to stay out of that room. For some odd reason, Kirsten had a lot of... Kayla's room was kind of more of the safer.
How old was she there then when this was? How old was she at the time?
Kirsten, the youngest?
At the time.
6 or 7.
I think she was just, I don't know, so bad with timelines.
Yeah.
Well, we stayed there so long, no telling when it happened, honestly.
Yeah, because that could have been a year or two after,
Yeah, I think she was 6 or 7, probably.
Yeah, but I guess Tina said she felt like somebody was patting her face, and so she dug into Lance, and I mean, just did a death grip on him, and they woke up the next morning, and I guess Tina was trying to say, somebody was patting my face, and he goes, well, somebody dug into me, and she goes, that was me!
I've got these scratches all over me. I don't know what happened.
So, yeah, that was...
So just about everybody...
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like anybody went there and didn't experience something.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Kayla babysat for the people, so after they had several people that moved into the house directly next to them, and they would leave.
This was the other house.
Yeah, the other house next to them. The longest person, while Carrie was living there, was there for 6 months. And they finally had a couple move in. They had 2 kids?
Yeah.
Boy and girl?
3 kids.
3 kids. Boy, girl, or 2?
2 boys and a girl.
Yeah, 2 boys and a girl. And Kayla would periodically go over there to babysit for them. And I asked Kayla, I said, I'm just kind of curious, but you go over there to spend the night with them sometimes. Like, do you ever notice anything? And she goes, Oh, yeah.
And this is at the other house?
That's at the house directly next door.
So that some neighbors did experience things like at least that one.
They just, the neighbors
I
never
asked them
talked.
about it, and they just smiled and kind of didn't say anything.
Well, it's not characteristic for a neighborhood like that to have the longest person to live there be 6 months.
Right.
Well, this couple that moved in there, so that before this new couple had moved in there, every couple before, like the longest time they stayed there was 6 months. But then they had a couple move in with these 3 kids, and they stayed for years.
5 years.
It was
yeah,
like 5 years. And Kayla again would go over there and spend the night and babysit. And she told me that she would experience sounds and different things that would happen over there as well. And it was kind of almost the same. But that couple, they would just not really talk about. No one talked about it as your neighbor because I don't know. It's just weird.
No one talks about it. Period.
You just don't want to.
You just knew why the house was for sale on your street.
Yeah.
It's something people don't talk about. I mean, they really don't because, like you said,
just that
people are
stigma
going to
with
think
it.
I'm nuts.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, look at the situation. I just happened to run into your dad one time, and somehow I got into a conversation with him about paranormal activity. I don't know how that came up. And then he started telling the story, and that's whenever I then came in and said, okay, well, we do this. Actually, no, I told him what we were doing, and he said, well, I got a story for you. And that's how that happened. And it's not uncommon for people not to talk about stuff.
You would be amazed how many times, like, I've had people like say, "Oh, you do a paranormal podcast?" And yeah, and he's like, "Well, you won't believe the story that happened."
Everybody that finds out has a story.
Yeah.
They do.
And that just shows you kind of how common this all might be, and people just don't talk about it because of the stigma behind it.
I mean, I can remember growing up. I mean, I had numerous friends from people that I worked with, when I was 16, 17 years old. People would tell me, oh, yeah, my grandma's house is haunted. She lives in an old house outside of Battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, most of the stories that I remember hearing were coming from the Battlefield area. I can remember someone telling me, if you're ever going to buy a house, do not do it in Battlefield. Just don't buy a house there.
There's a plug for the Chamber of Commerce.
At one time, we even had our house blessed.
Okay, how did that work? So you guys decided at this point in time, there's no doubt in your mind you've got paranormal activity at the house. You decide you're going to get it blessed. How did you go about, one, finding someone to do it? And then number 2, how did you kind of walk us through that?
And I'm curious who did it, if you can say. You don't have to say a name, but just who were they affiliated
he
with.
has recently passed. Well, actually, he passed.
He passed after he blessed the house.
Yes.
One of the women that I worked with at the hospital, her husband was a preacher, and I was telling her stories about what was happening, and I knew he was a preacher, and I'm like, can you come over and bless our house, please, and just make all this go away, make it safer and everything. And so he did. He didn't do any saging or anything like that. He just used holy water and
So was it a Catholic? It wasn't
I think he was Baptist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so he came over and did that. We felt peace for like a month or so, and then it started up again. So
I guess chronologically, the next question would be, after you moved out, did you have anything?
Nope.
It all got left behind?
Yep.
So you haven't had any paranormal activity at all once you cleared that house?
Correct.
And you moved out of Battlefield.
Yes.
You didn't go to another house.
We went to
No.
Marionville.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just white squirrels now.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
No ghosts.
Well, I could have told you Marionville had no paranormal activity.
Well, I remember asking Tim because he was the last one living in that house because Carrie had moved out first, and then Tim was there for not too much longer.
6
after that
months,
or
and then I
something like
moved back in before we sold it. So,
Yeah.
but
But-
he barricaded himself in the house. He lost his mind. He lost his mind.
Especially when they had left. He called my dad one time, and Dad went over to check on him, and the door jambs were completely destroyed because Dad said that he was shutting the bedroom door, the master bedroom door, and shoving knives into it, like butter knives,
to keep the doors
to barricade
from opening.
it, to keep it from opening. And he was there by himself. there was a lot, and Carrie had told me several times that it seemed as though it affected him a lot more than it did even the girls. And, you know.
Was his experiences different or just more frequent? Did he, I mean, obviously he came into contact with the hat guy.
He was there more. So because, you know, working construction, they're not always working because of the weather or whatever. And so he would have more time at home. You know, she was working 2 jobs at that point, and, you know, he worked construction, so there were times he was off, and he was at home because he took the kids to school or whatever, and so he was there a lot more than the others, and I think it just really affected him a lot.
And to be there alone for, what you said, 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean,
Health-wise,
there's
he
no
was
telling what kind
declining,
of
too.
There's no telling what kind of stories that.
Well, and after he moved out, he moved into an apartment, and I remember Kayla had moved in there with him, and so they said, well, hey, come over and you can see our place. So I remember asking him, I said, Tim, are you okay? And he seemed a lot lighter, brighter, just healthier. He had lost weight.
Yes.
I said, man.
He wasn't having shortness of breath, palpitations anymore.
Yeah, he said that I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. He said I needed out of that house.
Well, it's not uncommon, at least from what we've heard and seen, for one person to bear the brunt of, you know, the most aggressive activity in a house like that. And if he's jamming butter knives in the door to barricade it, which I don't blame him. It sounds like it was probably him that was getting, you know, the
brunt.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
Well, I mean, this is the same guy that saw an intruder in his house, tried to tackle him, and then went right through him.
Yeah.
Like, I keep going back to that because
once you land on the floor after trying to tackle someone, you have thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, and also, you know, you think back to Bear, the dog. I mean, he was completely, utterly fine. And the minute that they took him to that house, he immediately started whining. And so you think about how that house was destroyed. So there was another animal in that house that had gone through the same thing, that the door jambs were destroyed, the carpet was destroyed, and Bear was doing the same thing to everything in that house. So their door jambs were getting scratched, the carpet was being ripped up. They had to take their carpet out because the carpet had been all replaced, but they had to take the carpet out and put hardwood floors down to keep him from tearing the floors up. And he just, you know, he whined and whined and whined. And then if they put him out, he was whining and scratching at the door to get in. And that was the same damage that happened previously. It made sense to us
and
to
it was
know.
totally unlike him to bite people and growl at people.
Did you ever talk to anybody that had lived in this house prior to
or since?
No.
Do you know the current owners of this?
No.
I'm sure there's been 3 owners by then at least.
You know what I'm getting?
You're trying to angle them.
Well, you could drive down that street at any point in time, and there was for sale signs all over that street constantly. I mean,
That just seems like such an interesting story. What I'd really like to do is
I would too.
The
I
neighbors
know where you're going,
and stuff, and see how widespread this is, like down in this area.
We could put some flyers in mailboxes.
Oh, I'm sure they'd love that.
you might get some activity.
We'll send Tyler door to door.
Well, you know how
he's the friendliest one we got.
You know how when you come home and some guy who mows lawns has hung something on your doorknob? We could do something like that.
Yeah.
Offer our services. Your story is crazy. I mean, it's not, I don't mean crazy. I mean, it's just nuts. That's. I know you said it didn't seem like it was anything that was really meant to anybody harm, and I'm not sitting here saying that it was. But that's pretty aggressive activity.
I mean, what I consider aggressive is different than what a lot because.
Well, and we're not saying when we say aggressive, we're not leaning into the demonic.
This thing might not have done anything too physical, but I would argue that it did cause harm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
a psychological,
psychological, yes, absolutely. And I tell people about it if I'm working with them, and they look at me like you're nuts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but it happened. Like there's, I always questioned it too when people would tell me stories because this one kid, I mean, he lived with his grandma because he was not in a good situation. So he went to live with his grandma, and he said, oh, yeah, I heard people walking upstairs in the attic all the time, coming down the stairs. Like, and I said, where is this house? And ironically, he tells me outside of Battlefield. And then I had heard other people tell me that they had stories of their houses being haunted, and ironically, a lot of them were in Battlefield. And so I was always questionable too, like, well, is this really true? And then you start seeing these shows on TV and you're like, oh, wow, okay. And then when your sister says my house is haunted, I'm like, what? I did not have a good feeling when I walked in that house. The first time that I ever walked into it, I had a very strange feeling. I don't know what it was, but I just remember having, and then of course I'm looking at all the damage everywhere and I'm like, Carrie, like, she goes, oh, they had a dog, it just, whatever. And I'm like, okay. And then how ironic is that her animal starts to do the same thing.
Yeah.
We've got an investigation coming up in Battlefield.
Yes, we do. So we've never been there. I mean, we've been to Battlefield. We've never done an investigation in Battlefield before. So this is going to be our first time getting our beak wet.
My brother lived in Battlefield, and I never heard a story at all about that from him, but it just kind of depends.
Yeah, we went to his house several times there.
Yeah, he had a walkout basement and everything there at Battlefield. He never had any. Well, if my brother had stories from Battlefield, he never shared them.
And what you guys said earlier is something that we've seen. It's normal. It's human nature. The paranormal stuff, when you hear the stories, isn't relatable or real until it happens to you or someone you know. I mean, that's normal. That was the same thing for all of us.
Then you think you're crazy.
Right, until other people experience it and kind of give you reinforcements that.
Well, I can say that one time me and Carrie took my daughter Kimmy to go see Paranormal Activity in the movie theaters. My daughter is sitting in between us and she's like fingernails into my knee the whole movie. And I just remember being terrified. The movie gets over and, if you've ever seen it, they purposely have it pitch black in there as soon as it gets done. And no one is moving. No one is saying anything. And then this lady says, get up. And I heard this other lady say, I am not moving until they turn the lights on. And I look over, finally the editing and all that comes on the screen so you could see like a little bit. And I look over at Carrie and she's just like, eh. And I'm like, well, she lived it, so okay. I just remember my daughter just being terrified.
She slept with you for a while.
Yes, she did.
I don't know why we took.
Why would we take care or Kimmy didn't see that?
It just kind of speaks something about the things you've experienced when you watch Paranormal Activity, and at the end you're like, those babies.
The decision to go see that movie came from the same place as the decision to have Christmas at her house, I think. Well, look, we're glad. Was there anything else? Anything else? I mean, that's a lot. You had more happen there than I expected.
Yeah, we were thinking there was like 3 or 4 things, and it's like, wow.
Oh no!
I also had a mirror fly off the fireplace mantle and shatter in the middle of the living room floor.
I think that was before you even told me. Yeah. I think I remember it because that was kind of a hello moment.
Yeah. And then my kids would hear their names called out all the time, and they're like, that's strange, nobody's here.
Did Kayla say that I thought that I heard one of them say that they said they saw a figure of a woman, though, at one point in between the bedrooms, that there was just a woman, but I don't remember if that was the kids or if that was Tim, but only once.
Probably Tim. Yeah.
It was only once, but I could have swore that one of them told me they saw a figure of a woman. And I think that if it was the paranormal guy or the guy that came to bless the house, one of them told you that there was not just one there.
She had multiple spirits there.
Yes, that there was several.
And Tim is the ex-husband. There's no telling what stories he has that he's just never laid on anybody.
Yeah, I thought about inviting him. I think he worked last night, so.
Well, he's
incredible.
welcome to come sometime too if he wants to tell
we'd
his
love to
angle.
talk to Tim.
Because I'm sure if you're jamming butter knives in the door to keep the
I
door
was going to
closed,
say,
something's
like,
happening.
What has happened that made,
Something led to that for
We would
sure.
love to hear from him sometime.
Well, I mean, I could only imagine what it would be like to be there by yourself.
Oh, I
And
can't imagine.
I can't imagine what it would be like.
No, because there would be, my car would be loaded and I would be on the road.
You just got used to it.
Well, Tim also would state, because I told you how the living room was, so the front door was pretty close to the couch on the right-hand side, and the back door was close to the left-hand side of the couch. There is a deck there that has a stairwell that goes all the way down, plus you have a huge privacy fence. And this privacy fence, they put it tall back there on purpose because they wanted to make sure that no one was trying to come in the house, you know. And they had locks on both of the gates on the sides of the house so that no one could just walk through the gates and then like run out or whatever. Tim would experience times where the front door lock would jiggle, and it would just jiggle and jiggle and jiggle and jiggle, and he would finally get up and it would jiggle to the point that he got there, and he would open the door and no one would be there, and then he'd have to run down that little long hallway to get, you know, or corridor.
And then he would see the same thing happen at the back door.
So he would come back in and sit down, and then the back door would start to jiggle, and he would go to the back door. Well, there's a deck with a huge stairwell that goes all the way down, and they would have to scale the fence to get over that. How could they do that? By the time he made it to the door, it would stop jiggling.
That's right out of Paranormal
I was going to
Witness.
say, did you get to that episode yet?
Yeah.
Because that exact same thing.
This is exactly. There was a guy living at that.
He was a serial killer.
Yeah, the serial killer's house, and then there was a guy that was a serial killer that owned this place, and then the guy went and moved into like the guest house that was there, and this is exactly. I mean, I'm talking about exactly.
Even the stairs to the ground and everything was exactly like this episode that we're talking about.
Right, and he went over there and waited, and then yanked that door, which I wouldn't have done.
Yeah,
but he yanked that door open, and nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, and he had that happen several times. That was not just a one-time.
In that show, that guy actually walked out into the woods and was looking around and everything, which I also wouldn't have done.
John's more of a peek out the window type of guy than a throw the door open and confront type of guy. So, like, that's just like the story of the toilets and the water faucets turning on just over there and then back here, and then just kind of messing with you.
But the fact that the faucets, the water would be running, he would have to turn them off.
Yeah, physically turn off.
Turn them
and
off.
that when that kind of thing happens, when something happens like a toilet flush or the water's turned on, where there's actually a faucet, or even the skillet, you know, the knob is turned, that does make most people think, well, if they can manipulate that object, what else can they do? You know, can they pick up a knife and throw it? Who knows? If they can throw a mirror or a picture, off the mantle, then anything could be thrown.
The VCR, especially when people were there, there was a lot of people there. And the fact that happened, no one touched the remote, and then we could not get it to stop. And we physically had to unplug it from the wall because you could not get it to stop. You couldn't get it to pause. You couldn't get it to do nothing.
And it worked fine after that.
And it worked fine after that. So they did have a with the lightning hitting the house, they had a TV that it was shot, and then I think you had a couple other electronic things.
Lights would
flicker
and turn on and off as well. So.
There has been some scientific investigation done into the negative ionization related to paranormal activity attracting lightning strikes. Is why I focused on your house being struck so many times.
I thought it was kind of strange. But
I don't know if there's anything to it, but that is at least some, little corner of paranormal, stuff that they've investigated a little bit. Is the homes or businesses with a lot of activity have that negative ionization.
In the grand scheme of things, just, you said you thought it was strange. Like, there's lots of strange things going on there. So
Yeah.
lightning strikes kind of would be far down.
That's more normal. Yeah, that would be the most normal thing that happened.
Well, and the iTunes on the computer too freaked me out. That's
a story that I keep thinking about because I know, like, knowing how computers work and
Yeah.
how files are set up and how everything works on there.
They're either-
For it to
yeah.
play something different.
They're either read or they're not. Usually, a file like that is either read and the music plays, or it's not read; it's corrupt.
Yeah.
So that is bizarre.
And yeah, I mean, that had happened to Kayla several times. So she warned me about it before I even started. And then, I was thinking, what are you talking about? I figured out.
So I mean, every now and then we have producers from TV shows that will contact us and ask us if we have any, stories for them to tell on their TV show. Would that be something, if they did, that you guys would be open to?
Sure.
Or you can think of, okay, you don't have to think about it. Because they do that. I mean, occasionally we'll get that email. Hey, do you have a story about, we got one about the ceramic lamb once. We didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But we've got, others. There's a show called Paranormal Night Shift. I don't know if you ever watched that one. But they contacted us one time. They want to know if I need specific stories about nurses working in hospitals overnight. I didn't have any. But every now and then we do get them about homes with activity like that. And that would be your story would be the type we would definitely pass on. Because I can, as you tell it, I can kind of picture.
Oh, I can see. I was just sitting here thinking about the way that they would shoot this for a TV show.
Yeah.
And there's so many good things that they would use.
But yeah, that's a great story. Anything else you wanted to hit? I am not trying to rush you off. I am freezing my ass off. I'm freezing.
Well, and the train, going back to the train, they would, because Tim, I remember, would tell me it would sound like a train just running through the middle of the house. They would sometimes have the sounds of drums. And it sounded like it was outside, like in the side yard. And he would run outside. They would hear the drums inside the house, and he would run outside, and there would be nothing. So whatever sound they were hearing, it was coming from inside the house, not necessarily out. And he had that happen several times. I know he told me that you guys would hear the drums, and he would purposely run outside because he's like, okay, where's this coming from? And
that could very easily be a residual.
It could. I know we hit. It could be like a residual type military thing from the battlefield. A lot of times, drum type stuff is also related to Native American stuff.
It could be too. It could be as well. Especially with the beads with the Rainmaker thing. Yep. That could be Native American.
Yeah, I the beads kind of freaked me out because it was very loud. It was. I just remember it being very loud, and I looked directly towards the sound, and there was nothing there.
We experienced that ourselves at a location.
Yeah, we recorded that. We got a recording of that. Never figured out exactly what that was. I mean, it's kind of getting us in the mindset because we've never done an investigation in Battlefield, and we've got one coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we're gonna have a magazine guy with us.
Have we looked to see how close?
I don't know
geographically that house is.
Here's all I know about that is I asked the lady whose house we're going to if the address that you got from them was the same, and it's not. So I don't know the proximity of the two.
But they could be
a parallel street.
Yeah, could be. I don't know.
That'd just be interesting to know.
I mean, we'll let you know.
Battlefield is not like a huge city or anything.
No, yeah. We'll definitely take note of where we are and let you know.
But I've also known people in Battlefield as well that their houses are not.
Oh, sure.
They've never
right. Yeah, I told the story to my brother.
Because I've told stories to. I have a close friend that she grew up there, and we talked about it one time, and I said, "Have you ever experienced it?" And she goes, "Nope." Not,
well, I would say if 10% of the houses in any community have paranormal activity, that's a bunch.
That's really high.
That's a bunch. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. When we go down there for that investigation, let's take note of where we are, and then afterwards we'll let you know. And if we're anywhere near, that would be pretty incredible.
It would just be kind of neat for you're the next street down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
It would tie it up nicely for the podcast. It would be
It'd be cool.
Cool connection to make.
It would work.
We're probably going to be on the complete other side of the town.
Are you going to buy a house and move in now?
No. No. No, we're not.
Don't.
We've already run enough people off from this community. So I don't think we need to beat that drum anymore. Look, thank you guys for coming in. Your story was great, very compelling, and real. I don't. Yeah, it was. I mean, that's the kind of thing I wish I could put on the website. I just don't have anything. I don't have any the EVPs or the pictures or anything that you guys talked about to put on there. But we do thank you for coming in. It was a great story. It's going to get a lot of response on the podcast. We appreciate you telling it.
Yeah, I was, because watching some paranormal stuff, I have, seen where some people, lived in a place.
Yeah.
And then they moved, and it moved with them.
Yes, that's why I was asking if anything had happened.
Yeah, we've had that.
I was really worried about Tim. And that was one of the reasons why I just wanted to check on him to see, how he was doing after that.
He was so much better after
just
we left.
Immediate, he lost 40 pounds or something? It was drastic, and he just looked better color, better mindset, better, and he was just, I just remember him saying, so, I was worried about him. I thought, oh my gosh, I hope this doesn't happen to him,
I'm glad to hear that things improved, because we have heard and experienced stories where things didn't happen.
Where the activity did fall. And we actually had an experience where we caught EVPs of voices in this house. And then when they moved, to a completely different town and we investigated that house, the same voices are in that house.
It followed.
And the kind of like the mental health and things don't end well very often. Yes, that's true. But it sounds like he, typically the rule of thumb is generally when there's paranormal activity, at least the theory is usually spirits haunt a place, not a person. However, there are, like we just said, instances where, there have been tag-alongs. But I do have a picture I'm going to show you once we finish here, and see if it maybe resembles anything that you've seen in that house.
Yeah, because he was showing it to me when this podcast is going on. I'm like, yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, we'll take a look at that here in a minute. Thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it. We like having people on, especially people who, like you said, were not skeptical, but you just never thought about paranormal activity. Yeah.
Rational.
Yeah. Until, you experience it yourself. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. You're welcome back anytime. And if Tim, if you ever talk to him and he wants to come in and...
we'd love to talk to Tim.
Yeah, that would be really cool, just to kind of keep the story going.
Yeah, we'd love to talk with Tim.
So if he ever, feels rambunctious some Sunday and wants to tell his story, we're here with the mic and would welcome it.
He might. I'll let Chanda reach out.
Thank you, guys, for coming in here today. We appreciate it. We'll have more Dark Matter next week from Pythian Castle in Springfield, Missouri with Midwest Ghost Hunters.